Thank you, Dr. Hennel, for inviting me again. And I'm going to talk about the Florida legislation, where we've been and where we're hopefully headed. But more important than that, it's a lesson for everybody. The incredible impact we can have through legislation. And Dr. McTaggart really gave a great segue on overcoming some of these hopefully overcoming some of these geopolitical barriers through successful legislation. So there's some of the things I've done. I've been involved with American Heart, American Stroke. I'm an ED doc and involved with EMS. I want to thank our American Heart Advocacy Government Relations Director, Mark Landreth, who keeps feeding me good information. I'll update you on that. This is my disclaimer. I am a doctor, and here's a typical day at the office. You know, I showed these pictures last year, and Ricardo put me right after breakfast or lunch, and now he puts me at the end of the day. So I can't imagine why, just showing a few pictures, why he wouldn't want that right after a big meal. Yes, that is TPA contraindications, in case anyone was wondering. All right, history of stroke legislation. 96 TPA was approved, 2001 recommendation, identification for primary stroke systems. We've been very active in this state in EMS. Our medical director has been very active. We're fortunate. You'll hear Dr. Shepke has been a crusader for stroke, among many, many things. But back in 2001, we had a position statement advocating transfer stroke patients to the most appropriate hospital for, obviously back then, IV TPA alone. And we organized our system of care, or in its infancy, our system of care, to join in this effort. Under the leadership of AHA, American Stroke Association, I'm trying to match Dr. McTaggart's speed because he got us back on track, so I'll try to do that through mine. A multidisciplinary group worked. They did a great job, by the way, keeping it on time and doing a phenomenal presentation. Multidisciplinary group worked to develop a stroke bill, and we were the first state to pass any kind of legislative mandate for acute stroke care. And some of the things back then that we had in the law are still practical for today, and some of the things still being addressed in what we're going through in this current legislative session. We want to ensure that EMS knows which hospital provide appropriate stroke care, a hospital identification program, ensure the establishment of EMS triage assessment tool, a so-called stroke alert form, and ensure the establishment of EMS stroke transport protocols. So the EMS side required to utilize a protocol for assessment of stroke, and through the Florida Association of EMS Medical Directors, we've developed a sample stroke alert form which must be similar, and we revised it a couple times. I think to have that coming up. Prioritizing stroke is a high priority. And here's our stroke alert form. Obviously in 2004, when we passed the Stroke Act, it was all about TPA. Then 2016, it started becoming about intervention. In 2018, it was about dawn and diffuse 3. And here's our current form, just to show you a few things, as was alluded to. Well, number one, we want to get the witness name, whether they're transported long distances or by helicopter. We want to make sure we have a number to call for further information. And you can see the advanced, I guess I should figure out how to do this. Where is the, I'll just do it this way. You can see advanced stroke scale. Let me see if I can do it with my mouse. There we go. Advanced stroke scale. We're having trouble too, deciding which, I don't know which is the best. So we named a number of advanced LVO scales, and we even have room for others as they come out, so we don't have to keep revising it every 6 months or a year. But those are some of the most common ones. And they're anywhere from 72 to 85% accurate. We really wanted to focus on comprehensive and neurointervention and not miss opportunity, as you heard in the last talk. So that's the first priority. Take them to the right place where stroke intervention can be done if they're in the right windows, if they're high suspicion of LVO major stroke, high suspicion of a bleed, obviously lytic contraindications. Makes no sense bringing them to a place that doesn't give them the opportunity for intervention, and of course, wake up stroke. And then we have other entities where they can go to a primary stroke center if they're not a candidate. without going into belaboring that, I'll just show you that. So that's our most revised stroke alert form, sample stroke alert form we have for the state of Florida. The hospital component of the Stroke Act, they're required to report to ACA their status as a primary or comprehensive stroke center, either a copy of the certification as a primary or comprehensive stroke center. You can see on the bottom initially, and back in 2004, it was Brain Attack Coalition. Then Joint Commission came out with their criteria. Now we have 3 or 4 nationally certifying bodies, acceptable bodies that can certify. And here's where we had the problem. Remember, we were the first state to pass the Stroke Act. The only way we could pass it was give some leeway to centers. So we had to have this put in, that stroke centers could be attested that they meet all criteria, and all they're doing is the CEO of the hospital signing off they meet all criteria. There's no inspections, re-inspections, things like that. That was not meant to last this long, but that is the only way we could. One of the obstacles we had with some of the bigger mega hospital associations and things like that. And you can see the problems. You got no financial report, no registry requirement at the time. There is now. EMS and hospital were slow to support the effort. Mandate for hospital to become certified had financial implications. Okay, and that was a lot of the impetus behind the attestation and CO signatures in many of the large hospital systems not supporting it until we had that in there. And obviously the problem with attestation, there's no site visit inspections, re-inspections, unreported outcomes if a hospital attests. So we did have early successes by having, and that's why I said legislation, just passing something did a lot in the state of Florida. We, for many, many years, quickly became many primary stroke centers were certified. System of care really developed strongly in the state of Florida. As LVO and interventional stroke came around, we really have been pushing the envelope in the state. EMS increasingly engaged with hospitals, and more hospitals communicating outcomes to EMS, although certainly not as much as we hope. We have revised it several times. In 2013, we replaced Joint Commission with other accredited organizations, and that's the only highlight. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip through some of this. In 2017, a registry was passed for hospitals to utilize the registry. We added acute stroke ready hospital and registries. At that time, $200,000 dollars was appropriated. Last year was $500,000. This year we're asking for $1 million. So slowly going up, and we've had some very strong supporters in the legislation. I will point out Representative Magar on the top right has been a strong supporter. Just so this is where you need to know your legislators. Just so happened she had a stroke 6 or 7 years ago. So that was a nice piece of information we found out, and she's been a big crusader for our efforts. And here's some wording about the registry and has to be nationally recognized platform of data, things like that. And there's a joke. I cut down on my jokes from last year so I could speed it up. A brush with death looks like he had a stroke. Okay, wasn't too funny, I guess. Here's the crux of the problem in Florida. It is updated as of a few weeks ago. Primary stroke centers, acute stroke ready hospitals that are certified. We have 89% in Florida. That's a good number, but it still means 1 in 10 are still attested. So 1 in 10 primary stroke centers. Here's the big problem. Comprehensive stroke centers and thrombectomy stroke capable hospitals, 38%. So reverse the numbers. That means 62%, almost 2/3 of hospitals that are comprehensive interventional hospitals in Florida are attested. It means, again, a CO signing off. There's no inspections, no re-inspections for something that's pretty significantly done to patients. So that's the message we're trying to get out. I have some national numbers too. If anyone wants, since I got it updated, I thought I'd show some of those numbers on where we are in the nation, where we are in Florida. So that's the crux of problems. Over the years, many people have been saying we got to get rid of the attestation, and these two characters kept strongly advocating, and we did it, and I'll give them the credit for really the impetus behind pushing for it this year. So we're going after attestation this year, and that does directly contradict 2018 American Stroke Association guidelines, Class 1 recommendation to be certified. Okay, so that's one piece of ammunition we're using. SNIS obviously supports it and had that in an editorial. I'm going to skip to a little cartoon showing. What I do with this cartoon is I show all the steps a bill has to go through, and it goes back and forth, and that's sort of what we're going through right now. So what we had to do, we had to wait for the elections, obviously. Once we know the leadership roles, we know who to target, if you will, to educate them on our efforts and all the different subcommittees. First things, we have to get a sponsor, one from the House, one from the Senate, as we did in 2004. And these were our sponsors from the Senate and the House. Very, very strong supporters. And initially, the stroke bills from both the House and the Senate were identical. Now they diverged. Now we got to bring it back together to present ultimately one form, hopefully for the governor to advocate for. So what the bill, some of the highlights of the bill, it adds thrombectomy-capable stroke center. It removes, obviously, self-attestation, a method which hospital stroke centers can be recognized by ACA, and requires them to meet compliance requirements of certification by an independent third-party verification body. And there was a lot of writing. I'm not sure why they put this in. We really already have transport protocols, including LVO and comprehensive centers, but I guess the people who wrote this really wanted that reinforced. You can see a lot of some of the wording about large vessel occlusion and things like that, which didn't have as much wording in the some of the original certainly didn't have LVOs and some of the revisions. So what you need to do, and again, don't get caught up in the details here. It's more just what you need to go through to pass legislation. So you target your leadership, you get your sponsors, and then you find out who are the key committees and who are the key chairs and vice chairs. And you can see here's just the House. Dr. Pigman, actually, he's an emergency physician from Sebring. So, and I already mentioned the chair, Representative Bagar. So it's nice to have her in there. You can see all the different, without going into the details for the purpose of this talk, would go way too long, but all the different subcommittees that we need to go through and knowing who the leadership is. So we made a list of all the key dates, and you can see, without going into the details, presenting the bills. Actually, April 4th, being debated in Appropriations Subcommittee. I wanted to give a good report, but it got tabled today for other things that took up their time. So we need to wait for it to be presented in the next week, which is typical if you've dealt with legislation before. It's very frustrating when you have all your ducks lined up and presenters to lobby and speak, and then they table it at the last minute. So you can see some of the deadlines we're going to be faced for. Again, the details aren't as important as just understanding the concept of what it takes to pass legislation. We've got enormous support from AHA, American Stroke Association, SNIS, Florida EMS medical directors. These are all key groups. Florida Collaboration to Reduce Stroke Disparities, where the registry is, that's the University of Miami, Ralph Sacco, Jose Romano, are all down there. They've been big supporters, and their groups really helped us out. So what we've done while this bill's slowly progressed through the House and Senate is we've had all of our supporters make key phone calls and emails to some of these key legislators. And again, all this has to be planned out in advance. And we gave them 4 or 5 bullet points messages to get a point. Number one, on self-attestation, was never meant to be a permanent solution. It was designed to give hospitals time to meet compliance requirements, to be certified by an independent third-party verification body. We want to get the message across. Some hospitals are taking advantage of self-attestation by going through certification process for primary stroke center, then self-attesting that they meet the standards for comprehensive stroke center. Lack of transparency associated with smoke and mirrors, and that example is contrary to the transparency that in this case House Speaker Oliva expects from hospitals, which he's made it a point as one of his main goals. We want to get the message to our legislators. Consumers have a right to know what standards, if any, their hospitals are meeting. And finally, removal of self-attestation will protect your constituents and maybe even your family. I'm not sure which they think is more important, but we hope that they think one of those or both are very important to that legislator. So you have to get support. You have to really have a game plan, a strategic game plan, which is what we're doing. We did it in 2004, and we're doing it now. And then we, at certain key opportunities when we've want that message given or where we've seen obstacles, we get our groups and our support together to make phone calls and sound out emails. And you can see, again, it's not important exactly what happened when, but just all the steps that have gone through. This was interesting. In mid-March, it was placed on the Health Market Reform Subcommittee agenda, and then it was quickly taken off for reasons we can guess, but we're not 100% sure. So I'll just skip down here. That's when we just put a call to action, if you will, to all our support groups to just bombard, actually, in particular, Representative Pigman, who was chair of that committee, to add it back on the agenda, and he did. So we thank those in this room who made those calls. I know a number of you did, and we appreciate it. It was unanimously supported. And back in the Senate, you can see some of the committees and went through. You're going to hear about Chief Shank's story. He was great, went to Tallahassee and did a phenomenal job speaking before that subcommittee. So these are all the steps. I just want to give you a feel. Again, not so much the detail, but you have to know these steps, and then they change. Like I said, the subcommittee today totally took it off their agenda because they didn't have time. So we have people in Tallahassee helping us out. We still need to address removal of attestation, that it's not left up to ACA to do through rule. I think we'll be successful in that. We still need to make sure the MS medical directors, for the most part, have the authority to have their transport protocols based on their own local resources and things like that. Again, we have a sample form. This was an interesting thing. We had it in 2004, this grace period for certification. In order to, this came up in the last week or two, in order to get through some of the major hospital systems, particularly Florida Hospital Association, Adventist, HCA, they all said, well, there's no way we can do it. If it's implemented July 1st, we can't be certified, especially in comprehensive stroke, right away. And actually, that's fair. So we are amending to add a grace period, and all of a sudden they're on our side. So politics, as you know, in legislature is all about negotiating these things. So we will have a grace period in there that we are amending just to compete. And we did that in 2004. I think we had till 2006 to really get everyone on board and certified. There's still opportunities to change. We like the Senate bill. The House bill still needs some amendments to it. We have opportunities. We can add language change back into the agenda of the House HHS meeting scheduled for April 10th. Second reading on House floor amendment. We have the option, the Senate bill passes first, and then the House must consider modification. So these are all the ways, that's way beyond the scope of my education, but that's why we have our advocacy people to help us really strategize. But I can tell you, I forget what I said at the beginning, we've been planning this, Ricardo will tell you, for a year. You know, this didn't just happen where we just got together a few phone calls in the last few weeks or month to do this. We've been planning this a year, all these steps, and then keep modifying as issues come up. SNIS is going to do a Get Ahead of Stroke Hill Day on Monday. Ricardo's going to be part of that, and other people in this room, I'm sure, will be going there to have a display in the rotunda between the House and the Senate, and also talk to key legislators and target some of these people that we talked about. And you can see some of the deadlines we're coming up to, and hopefully by May 3rd we'll pass for Governor sign off on. If not, we'll do it again next year. So this is why we're doing it, and this is a message we're trying to go get out there. We're doing it because we have, with the Stroke Act in 2004, we have no doubt we saved many lives, and we think this is the next step to further that concept along. We want to go for more of our stroke. That's what we want our stroke patients running out of the hospital. It sounds like you're doing a good job in Rhode Island. So go out there, save brains, and any questions or comments? I do it okay? Sometimes. I try to rush you. So again, don't get caught in the details, except to know there's a lot of details involved. You got to plan this stuff for people in other states, for other legislative efforts, but it's very rewarding when it does pass and you see the changes and getting across some of these geopolitical barriers that were discussed in the last lecture. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Charlie. It's
okay,
awesome.
Thank you.